So in order to advance our society's mission, we felt that we really needed to have a person that was really acting as our advocate to help continue our mission in collecting stories and learning about things and asking people the tough questions about what it is that we want to preserve about our history. So we interviewed and we hired Kate. So Kate works for the Society as our Dublin School Museum Manager. She works part-time. She earned her undergraduate degree in history and German with a minor in museum studies from the Beloit College, and is currently working towards her graduate degree in public history with a certificate in museum studies at UWM. Kate comes to us with previous experiences working with the Milwaukee County Historical Society, the Wright Museum of Art and Logan Museum of Anthropology, and the Kenosha History Center. So Kate is working with us to accept and accession our donations, research stories, and collection items. She's going to be working to conduct oral history interviews, maintain our social media, and help us to connect with others and engage with our membership. So with that, I'd like to welcome Kate.
Hello. So you probably recognize this photo because it was in Jean's presentation. We've also had it in a bunch of our content. So it was in the Village newsletter a couple months ago, right after it was donated. It was in our newsletter, which we have here, and you probably got in the mail. On the Facebook page, which you should like. And it was on the invitation to this event, so hopefully you've seen it. But if you didn't already know, this is a photo of the large barn at the Uihlein stock farm, which was located in what was then known as Truesdell, along the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad. So it started off on the north side of Highway 50, roughly where Menards is today. And its largest, the farm covered 1,200 acres. It had between 500 and 800 horses at its largest as well. It was owned by the Uihlein brothers, August, Henry, and Alfred, who bought the land in the late 1870s and operated until 1820 as a stock farm. For anyone that's interested in the original pronunciation of that name, it's Uihlein. It's a German U with an umlaut over it, but I'm just going to say Uihlein because it's all we know, so it'll keep it simple. So these are the Uihlein brothers. Henry, Alfred, and August are the ones circled there. They owned the stock farm, and August was probably the one that was the most well-known for his involvement with horse racing. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the brothers because it's a pretty interesting story. August, Henry, and Alfred, along with their three other brothers pictured there, began managing Schlitz Brewery in Milwaukee after the death of Joseph Schlitz in 1875. They gained complete ownership of the brewery after the death of Schlitz's wife, Anna Maria Krug. The Uihleins were the nephews of August Krug. He was the founder of the brewery, and hence why the brothers inherited it. Joseph Schlitz had married into the family. Anna Maria Krug was August Krug's daughter. So that's how the Uihlein brothers ended up with the brewery. And then Joseph Schlitz was just the one that named the company after himself when he married into the family. All this to say, the Uihlein brothers were quite wealthy by the late 1870s, and thus they were able to do things like own a horse farm in southern Wisconsin, aka the Uihlein stock farm. For them, the farm was actually a means of diversion from the onerous cares of an extensive business. So this was for fun for them. This wasn't their main project. This was what they did to escape from work, actually. So the farm in Truesdell, or Pleasant Prairie as it is now, that was their main stock farm, but they also had others in Menominee Falls. There was another one 9 miles from the Schlitz Brewery in Milwaukee. And I actually found some information, according to the Wisconsin Harness Racing Hall of Fame, that August had also built a stable on the roof of one of his largest breweries, and the horses would be lifted up in an elevator because he just wanted horses to be right there at work with him. That was just how much he loved horses, you know? So that was a pretty interesting story. There was another kind of cool story about August that I will tell you briefly. This was a story told by a friend of his, Charlie Dean, after he had had dinner with August and his wife. So August's wife, Mrs. Uihlein, she had listened for some hours to her husband's description and recital of the breeding of some of his choice trotters. And then she spoke up and complimented him on his extensive knowledge of the bloodlines and his remarkable memory for the names of the dams and the granddads, etc., etc. So she said, "I believe that you know the names of the dams of nearly all the horses you own." And August was pretty prideful in this. He said, "Yeah, I think I do." And then she said, "And you know the names of their granddams too?" He's like, yeah, I do. She replied to him then, "August, can you tell me the first name of your grandmother?" And that stumped him. So, of all the horses that August knew so well, his pride and joy at the stock farm in Pleasant Prairie was the Harvester, which you can see here. He purchased this horse in 1908 for $9,000. It went on to beat the world record for horse trotting in 1910. It trotted a mile at 2 minutes 30 seconds, and then the horse also went on to beat his own record more than once, his best time being 2 minutes and 1 second. And that remained the world record for 6 years, actually. Now, as much as August loved this horse, he was, after all, a businessman, and according to the Wisconsin Harness Racing Hall of Fame again, he ended up selling the Harvester for $50,000 to CKG Billings of Chicago. So, quite the investment, not to mention all the money he won from all the races this horse won. Actually, an interesting thing I will note later, though, is that I came across a newspaper article from 1920 that mentions that this horse was still at Uihlein Stock Farm in 1920. So, contradictory information. We find a lot in history. Can't always trust those old newspapers, but so it could be worth some more digging to find out. So then, a fun fact, actually, in 2011, the Harvester and August Uihlein were both inducted into the Wisconsin Harness Racing Hall of Fame. Which brings me to my next point. You'll notice that the jockey is not sitting on this horse. He's being pulled by a little wagon there. And, I didn't know anything about horse racing before I started researching this, and I was very surprised by this, but apparently it is indeed a thing. It's because the horses at Uihlein Stock Farm were blooded horses, aka standard-bred horses or trotting horses. So the typical jockey on a horse would be a thoroughbred horse. If anyone's interested in horse racing history, there's a little fact for you. So they competed in trotting harness races at the horses at Uihlein Stock Farm. So I'm going to show you some of the plat maps we have of Pleasant Prairie. So that little square there is the Uihlein Stock Farm from 1887, that little square of land. This is the first plat map where we see the farm appear. The previous plat map was from 1873, which was before the farm was established. And this plot here was about 654 acres. If we zoom in, we can see where it says it was owned by August Henry and Alfred Uihlein. And it also says Blooded Horse Farm, which again means they were pulled by those little wagons. And then Henry Laughlin, superintendent. So that means he was the farm manager. We'll be talking a little bit about another farm manager later, but I did some digging into some old newspapers to try and find some more information about this guy, Henry. And he has a bit of a sad ending, I'll warn you. But Henry was the farm manager at least by 1888. That year there was a newspaper article. It mentioned how the stock farm was a very popular destination for summer visitors to the area. The article said the farm manager, Henry Laughlin, was very courteous to visitors, although he allowed nothing to interfere with business, and the training and speeding of horses goes on just the same. There's also an interesting side note I will say. Not only was the stock farm a tourist destination, but it was actually a bit of a community gathering space. In 1892, there was reports of several young people going out to the farm to dance in the pavilion. So it was a bit of a party place as well. But back to Henry. I mentioned the story doesn't have a very happy ending, or not a happy ending at all. In 1898, Henry was actually stricken with paralysis. I wasn't able to find out if this was directly related to his work on the farm, but I say there's a chance. Working with horses sounds like it could be dangerous. He was taken to Kenosha for treatment, but he lost the use of both of his legs, and he became an invalid. His wife took care of him. And then a news report from a year and a half later reported that he had ended his own life. He was only 35 years old at the time. Going back to the 1887 plat map, these are some of the depictions that are a part of that grouping of the plat map. So there's some depictions of the farm. You can see the large barn at the bottom there. I blew up the picture on this side. There's also the farm manager's house in that middle picture, as well as with some other buildings in the back. And then there's the driving park at the top. And you can actually see the horse pulling a little wagon, the little jockey on the wagon. So there's where that original plot of land was. And now we got some more land up in there. So as you can see, it expanded south, and it now had some land closer to the state line. Actually, kitty corner from where Dublin School stands now. And you can actually see too, well, kind of, but that is the little marker for where Dublin School was at the time. This is where it is now. And as you'll see in the next one, it's going to be there in the next slide. So 1908, the land's pretty much the same. And then at this point, Dublin School is in that corner on the land that the Uihlein brothers owned, which I'm pretty interested to find out how that happened. And I'm curious to know what the land down here, if it was used differently than what's up there. So we zoom in on the main part of their land there, and you can actually see that driving park in the bottom corner. So that's that driving park that we saw in that previous picture. So the stock farm was sold in 1920, but the brothers still maintained ownership of some of the land, as you can see here. I thought it was kind of interesting that this plot of land circled here was actually designated as Schlitz Brewing Company, because all of the other ones either say Uihlein Stock Farm or the Uihlein brothers. So, and now as you can see, that portion of the land to the left there and then down is now owned by Matt Rasmussen, who bought the farm in 1920 when the brothers sold the stock farm. There was a newspaper article that claimed that one of the reasons for selling was due to the fact that the Chicago and Northwestern Railway passed through the property, making it unfit for a horse ranch. I think it could also be due to the fact that August Uihlein died in 1911, and he was the main proponent for the stock farm. It was his passion. At the time that they sold the farm had 350 horses, and all of them were sold at auction. But this is where I found that newspaper article that says that the one horse they didn't sell was the harvester. This was from the Antioch News. So I'm not sure what the truth is on that. Thought I'd be honest with you. So Rasmussen bought the farm, and he turned it into a dairy farm. As I'll talk about in just a moment, I had the pleasure of speaking with Mary Flashner, whose sister is actually here today. It's Jody over there, right? Yeah. But Mary is the one who donated the scans of these wonderful photographs that you see here and that you saw earlier, and there'll be another one later too. Mary's great-grandfather was Gilbert Larabee, who was the farm manager of the stock farm in the early 1900s. When I spoke with her, we decided that these photographs were probably taken in the 1940s. So at the time, it was no longer the stock farm. At this point, it was a dairy farm, which I hadn't known previously. And in fact, if you zoom in on the pictures, you see some cows. So definitely a dairy farm. So when Mary originally gave us the scans of these photographs a while back, all we knew was that her great-grandfather Gilbert Larabee had been the farm manager at the stock farm at some point. When we get such great donations like these, it's just so vital that we capture as much of the story that goes with them as possible. It's like Nathan was saying, it's all about the relevance. We need the story that goes with the pictures. Like, yes, these pictures are beautiful, and the barn is amazing to look at. And it's also fascinating to learn about the Uihlein brothers and their involvement with the stock farm. But what I really want to do for the Historical Society is work on capturing the stories of people like Gilbert Larabee. So I spoke with Mary a couple weeks ago, and afterwards she sent me another photograph, this one here, which was in Jean's presentation as well. So that's Gilbert and then his wife on the left. It's from about 1919, she said. So I learned a lot about Gilbert talking with Mary. For starters, Gilbert's parents, Eliezer and Elizabeth Larabee, were among the first settlers to arrive in Pleasant Prairie. They owned a farm in Pleasant Prairie, which was then passed down to Gilbert and his brother. Gilbert worked on the family farm until 1892, and then he spent a year in California, actually, because his daughter was diagnosed with tuberculosis. So they went there because better weather, maybe she'll feel better too, but that's not what happened. Unfortunately, she died within that year. and Gilbert and his wife moved back to Pleasant Prairie. According to census records, by 1910, Gilbert had moved to Bristol. So he was the farm manager at the stock farm between the time Henry Laughlin died in 1899 and 1910. He lived in the farm manager's house, which is that house up there in the corner. So we're thinking that he must have had paid help on his farm too, because he was doing both of these jobs. He still had his own farm at this time. Mary mentioned she remembers driving by this house in the corner there through her childhood, and she had no idea that her great-grandfather had once lived there. It wasn't until much later that she learned this. And she had no idea that her family history was so involved in raising stock too, because it wasn't just Gilbert, it was a bunch of people in her family who were really interested in this. This house was located right under the underpass on Highway 50 until at least the 1970s, because she said she has her uncle who lives in Washington, I believe, he has a photograph of this from the 1970s, but Mary hadn't thought to take a scan of it because she was like looking for older photographs, which is what I'll say now is, 1970s, it's history, guys. It really is. 5 minutes ago, it's history. So we got to collect this stuff now. It's really important. And I wanted to ask too, so right under the underpass on Highway 50, does anyone remember this house? Can you recall?
I lived in it.
Amazing. Well, I need to talk to you.
I own it.
We got to connect. Oh my goodness.
I rented it from his dad.
Well, we're going to have a long conversation later. I'm going to give you my card.
The next chapter.
Awesome. Yeah. And this is why this is so important. We need to make these connections and find the people who know the stories, so we can tell them and preserve them for the future. But yeah, the main point that I want to make here is that the Uihlein stock farm, it impacted the community in Pleasant Prairie. People worked there. Gilbert worked there. Henry Laughlin worked there. Many other people worked there. People came to visit there. It was a tourist attraction. People went to dance there. People had fun. We have a history here in Pleasant Prairie that's worth being told, but like I said, we need to gather these stories now, so that way they'll last for future generations. And that's why we're all here, because we care about it. We care about preserving our past and educating the future. That's our big mission here at Pleasant Prairie Historical Society. So if you have a story that you feel needs to be told, if you think it needs to be preserved, please get in contact with me. I brought some of my cards. I probably should have brought more, but I will be happy to give you one. I'm only just beginning to dig into this village's history. I've been here since April, but I've learned a lot, and I can't wait to learn more. And to share it with you all and the rest of the community. Jean already plugged our Facebook page, but I'm going to do it again because it's near and dear to my heart, and I want everyone to see the cool stuff I post. So yeah, if you want to keep up with the society, I post historical photographs, collections items, photos from our events, and society news. You can see there was our event for the annual meeting, which you are all here now, but you can always find out about our events on this page. It's the best place and the easiest way to keep up with us in your day-to-day lives.
Can we back up to that slide? It was right after the map of the Uihlein farm. There's a windmill in there, and I'm just wondering if that wasn't the gin mill. Was that the gin mill on Highway 50
There.
in the background?
No, what that was is it was a windmill that pumped water because this was a low area.
So that was not the windmill at the gin mill?
Through there and that windmill pumped water, that's what that was.
Okay. I just thought that might
No,
be...
that's long before the gin mill.
But I was wondering what that was too, so thanks for asking.
I knew it was a windmill, and that you don't remember the gin mill. Jerry does, because he spent a lot of time there.
I was curious whether the Rasmussen family that bought it was related to the Broadstock Rasmussen, that bought the stock farm.
No, I don't think so.
No? Oh, okay.
No, and just a little history on that. Matt Rasmussen, he owned a lot of property. He owned property between those tracks all the way to Summit. They called him the Cabbage King. He raised a lot of cabbage. And where Concrete is, that's where they stored it underground. They had like buildings that were built under kind of halfway in the ground. And they loaded railroad cars out of there. And in 1929, he took a terrible hit with the stock market crash, and they found him hanging in the barn. Wow.
I have one other question, if I may. Was that house moved?
That house?
No, the one that you said you lived in, no.
No, we burned it down.
Oh, there's a house just east of D on Highway 50 that shows a strong resemblance to that house. Or it may not even be there anymore, but when I was growing up.
Well, that house was burned down to make room for development for Menards in 1996. So it stood till 96. Mhm. And of course, the summer kitchen was torn off many years before, and there's actually another building right behind it. But a lot of good memories in there.
Oh, yeah.
Jerry almost died in there. Moving the refrigerator down from the upstairs. But it was running out for a long time. A lot of Ray Smith used to live in it. He was the full-time fireman for Pleasant Prairie. Of course, the Pleasant Prairie Fire Department was right in that same yard. If you want to switch to a different picture there. No? Where it shows all three of them together, all three of the pictures together. There. See, if you notice the house there, well, that was the main driveway that went straight in, but that building right in front of the beyond the drive, that actually was, the wings were torn off of that, and that was moved up across the driveway from the main house, and another house was made out of that. And then there was a building built there. It was a Quonset type building. At first it was just a warehouse or cabbage and onions and stuff like that, and then in 1946, Pleasant Prairie bought it. Just the building, and 10 feet around. And then they turned it into the fire department. And of course, it subsequently became the highway department. Fire department moved to Highway C. And yeah, so but this is period correct here. The way the driveway was and the buildings where they were. Even though it's an artist's drawing, but my dad purchased that property in 1948. Yep. So, and the barn had been changed. There was a guy by the name of William Zand. He bought the property he tore the wings off of here and here. And this ended up to be a corn crib around here. But this barn had an 1/8 of a mile racetrack inside of it. That's how big it was. It was huge.
Wasn't that the Peacock Farm at one time?
No,
Why do I remember that as the Peacock Farm when I was a child?
Peacock Farm, I believe, was where Sears is, isn't it?
No, that's where I remember it because of that steeple.
No,
Okay.
that was never Peacock.
When I was,
Like I say, after Rasmussen, William Zand bought it, and I believe he might be the one that had the dairy cows in it. But those two wings were torn off. But even when the main barn still stood, when my father owned it, it was 90 feet wide by 220 feet long. It was a big building, yeah. And that burned to the ground in 1963, around this time of year.
So what did you farm there then? What did your family farm?
What did we farm?
Yeah.
Well, my dad farmed potatoes and onions and carrots and cabbage and mainly vegetables. And when the barn burned, all the equipment was inside of it, and it was full of potatoes. And the people that worked for him, they loaded up trucks, and down in Illinois they went and sold baked potatoes. No, we really don't. We really don't know what really caused it, but it was so old, and it went up like a match, you know. Pleasant Prairie Fire Department was right in front of it. But they just couldn't save it. So, but
Dennis, is that the photo that you have?
I do have photos here of it burning.
Oh, you do?
Hand them to Kate, she can kind of show you.
I've seen it, I just
This is a picture of the stock car.
Thank you.
See also with this picture, this is actually, maybe Kate could hold it up and we can talk about that. That's really interesting too.
That's what it looks like it's stated. Although it's not correct as far as how the buildings and everything are lined up. But it's a picture on it. It had a lot of buildings to it. It was a massive complex. And just massive. But how we ended up with this picture, kind of a neat story. My sister lives in Phelps, Wisconsin, which is up by Eagle River. Well, Mrs. Uihlein and they pretty much own a town up there called Bowler Junction. They own a lot of property up there. And my sister's oldest grandson's fiance at that time, her family owned a small kind of a kitchen deal where they sell food and they sell beer, convenience store. Well, a guy was coming in there and his name was Uihlein. So they kind of knew the story of the farm from my sister, these people, and so it all got together, and he brought in a picture of just like this, but it's huge, just like that, all framed up, and he said, "Here, give this to to Jan, my sister." He said, "That means more to them than it does to me," and that was a cousin of Dick Uihlein.